sometimes my introductions are so bad, I just do an overdub in editing because I go, oh, that's just terrible. Okay, so look, we've got two of the three of us here. David Ardley, I would call him a global professionalist or a professional globalist, been all over the world, was a founding principal, a startup specialist, and soon we're going to have Barry Cooper, but we'll do that introduction when and if he arrives. Here's the backstory. I've been using the term, well, that's common sense, for decades, and I've always sort of harp on about it. And I write a lot about education, and I thought, I reckon there's an article here, common sense in education. And at the same time, David and I were threatening to have our second Zoom chat for months, and we finally made it happen. And I don't think I planned to talk the whole time about common sense, but that's what we ended up talking about. So at the end of that, I thought, well, at least there's two of us who think it's a good idea to talk about common sense in education. And so then that sort of gave me the impetus to write the article. And then we said, well, we should actually have another one of these chats and record it. And then we both thought, let's bring in Barry Cooper because he's always an interesting guy to chew the fat with. So that's the backstory to this. I just suspect that common sense has a place. It's probably frowned upon in some circles because it's, not scientifically backed. And I have always followed my nose when it comes to pursuing teaching practices that are better than what I've been doing in the past. And no one's ever said to me, well, if you do this, Richard, it's going to be better than what you're doing currently. But through conversations and through thinking and being frustrated about what I'm doing doesn't work and there's got to be a better way, and then talking to other people and a little bit of reading, but not much, you come across ideas and go, well, that's just obvious. I should do that. I don't know how much of that happens in education, in teachers. I don't know how often teachers are encouraged to do that. I certainly don't get the impression that that's a focus that the experts are suggesting. And I don't claim to be an expert, but I'm suggesting it. And over to you, David. So there's my introduction. What do you reckon?
I'm on the same lines as you, actually, Richard, and it's a fantastic topic. I think you hit the nail on the head. The most reasons why common sense is often pushed to one side in schools is because of the metrics and the data and the dare I say the anxieties that are applied externally to that common sense call. And I'm thinking of governance, if leaders, people think, oh, is that a risk? And that comes into it as well. Common sense quite often can be a risk because you're challenging the status quo. And I think that is a big problem that schools have, as much as, and you quite correctly said, a lot of school development seems to be driven by data and data metrics, and there's an absolute need for that sometimes. Marketing and admissions, you're an international school, where the children coming from in terms of the parental, kind of geographical area, what they're looking for in a school curriculum, all that stuff. I get that. But the simple stuff where schools tend to overlook, I think that is where you and I in our last chat kind of came to the fore. It's the basic fundamentals. I mean, at the end of the day, there aren't many sectors in kind of the business world where you have such a cluster of supposedly ferociously intelligent people working in one building in one place, the academics and the creators of a school. And we take common sense off at the knees. We kind of cut it away when someone comes up with, what about just, something quite fundamental? It could be to do with, pupils are walking around corridors. It could be with a car parking scenario. We mentioned that before. It could be classroom management. A common sense call, we think, oh, I'm not sure about that. It's not in the, you think, really? Do you have to go down that road of another meeting, a discussion, and that when we can all barely see that window needs to be shut because the kid's going to bang their head on it or whatever it may be?
Yeah.
And I think that fundamentally schools kind of shoot themselves in the foot by not allowing common sense sometimes to happen because there's a fear culture. Does common sense mean risk? And that I think is something we could look at further. Common sense, bizarrely, it's a bit like artificial intelligence. We won't go there now.
No.
But common sense isn't that common.
Yeah.
Or if it is, it's beaten down, And and that was lovely talking to you, Richard. Thank you so much. Have a very, very good day. All the best.
Hello, Barry. Now, I've got my official intro. We're doing the intro in two phases here because we didn't know when you were going to arrive. And so we've already started. And as I said to you, we love when the stars arrive late on the stage. It's always, a round of applause. But so if you haven't come
I,
across
a
Barry,
catastrophic morning. I thought I was on time, and then mix up with the kids. I took the wrong Metro card, so I had to
that's
run
fine.
back to the
I
house. I had
said
my
don't.
my
I
four
said
year
don't
old's
stress.
Metro card.
We'll roll with the punches, you know. So
I was
Barry's
on time.
the principal of the Global College of Madrid. He's also a podcast host, which is something that I'm not. I just have discussions every now and then called Leading Your International School. So check that out. Barry also loves startups, as does David. And Barry and I had a chat like this earlier this year, I think it was. That's called Leadership, Kindness, and Socratic Education, a discussion with Barry Cooper, et cetera, et cetera. So check that out. I think, you said some amazing things there. It was really good. And the article that I penned after chatting with David, because I realized there was at least two people on the planet who thought this common sense idea was worthwhile talking about. It's called Common Sense Education, a thought-provoking perspective. That's kind of what we're talking about here. Barry, how's your day going?
I'm good now. I'm sat down. So it's I'm in Madrid, so it's kind of just after kind of 8 a.m. here this morning. So I'm a big fan of kind of public transport. So I
Yeah.
don't drive in, and any city centre kind of liver will tell you it's much easier just to jump on the metro, unless you have your twin daughter's metro card with you, which will get you a hefty fine if you end up running past
Right.
a ticket check. So I had to sprint back to the house and pick up mine and deliver hers, which she thought was hilarious.
Right.
So I left home to the cackling of a 4 year old running back, and then I ended up jumping on a bus. So
Feel no pressure to agree, Barry. David and I have already hooked in and said we're both on board with most of these ideas, but we probably need an antagonist. Or as a teacher, I had different stints in little schools, and I think I was just following common sense because I had no one around me who knew any better than what I did. But I knew that I was not doing well because the lights behind the kids' eyes were mostly dim, and this is the early days. And so I'm always trying to work out better ways to do things. And I'd come across an idea, or someone would mention something, or I'd see a teacher do something that was different to what I did, and I go, that's just obvious. That's common sense. Whether it's intuition or I think we can call it common sense, but I think there should be more of that in education. What do you reckon, Barry? Because if I go back and
yeah,
listen to that discussion that you and I had, everything you said was you were talking about a lot about
yeah,
leadership and kindness and etc.
yeah.
Socratic
I think
education,
I
it's
think
still common sense as far as I'm concerned. I'm going to stop talking. Go.
I think sometimes teachers are their own worst enemies. So as you professionalize, as you become more professional, as you end up with, bodies that give you, accreditation for this, accreditation for that, there's a need to footnote and reference and move down a kind of an academic path that leads people into kind of following processes that are perhaps kind of overly convoluted rather
Yes.
than just doing what you do in the classroom. For me, I think. Unfortunately, I can't be an antagonist. I think common sense in the classroom is one of the things that you absolutely have to have, and you have to rely on your gut as a teacher, and you have to rely on also thinking. You're essentially an actor. You're playing a part in many ways, and I think the nature of teaching is one that really rewards those who can ebb and flow with a changing classroom and take advantage of these gaps and these moments and these ideas and these questions that allows you. And that's something that comes with experience. There's a great deputy head I worked with years ago called Nigel Biggood, and it was like the secrets of the universe he gave me. He said, Barrett, nothing beats experiential wisdom. I don't care how many degrees you've got.
Yeah.
It's the years you've got in the classroom that are going to make the difference. And he was absolutely right
Yeah.
because it's about having seen some of this stuff before, having seen kids do these things before, and especially when you realize that you're not the smartest bloke in there and you've got some bright spark in there, you think, oh my God, you're talented. And so you then have to think, right, well, and again, common sense comes in. You think, right, my job is not to be smarter than her or him. My job is to say, right, how can I help you get the best out of the Ferrari you've got in the garage? Because at the moment you're driving it in second gear, and we want this in, top gear, and we want you kind of motoring. So I think it's a reliance on on gut. I think it's I think common sense in the, it's Occam's razor sometimes, isn't it? You find the simplest solution to the complex problems. And also I think, where we as teachers overcomplicate things, I think that's where sometimes we are our own worst enemy.
As Barry has said, I've always kind of championed the idea that wisdom and experience kind of almost overrides what you might have put on a piece of paper. And please, I'm not deriding or taking away anything from lifelong learning qualifications. But by the same token, there are lots of young, vibrant, risk-taking, kind of youthful teachers and coming into the profession who also have common sense, but they don't have the wisdom of that profession yet. But they've got a lot of common sense they bring into the game in whatever area it might be. So we also need to kind of nurture that as well. But common sense gets stamped out, as we said in the previous chat, Richard, often by the situation that we're in. It's either driven by that data metrics thing, the school inspection, the assessment regulation, whatever it might be, to things such as basic classroom management. And again, we spoke about this in a day, we've had laptops in schools for over a quarter of a century, but there are still teachers that will have a desk at the front, stand at the front. All the kids have got their laptops, with the screens away from the teacher. And then the teacher wonders why they're on YouTube or Netflix or whatever else it is. When in fact, I remember in this new school we did in France, all the teachers' desks were at the back of the class and the teacher was there. The beam thing was at the front. So you could see the screens and the teacher wandered forward when they wanted to engage with the kids and then walk back. That for me was very much a common sense. It wasn't a eureka moment, but I could hear the kind of, oh, wow, that's a cool idea. And you're thinking, well, how else can when you do exam invigilation, you're told to stand at the back. And I don't want to talk about assessment now. You stand at the back of the room so you can see, so the kids don't see where you are, and you can look over their shoulders to make sure they haven't got a crib sheet or something else with them. It's a common sense call, but despite the technology, we haven't transferred that across. That's not about how big your brain cell is or your qualification. It's just a simple call, but we lack it sometimes, and I'm not sure why. Go on, Richard. Sorry.
I've got to shut this blind. I've got the sun.
But I think you're right. But this is where we end up overcomplicating things. We end up overcomplicating these ideas and you end up with diatribes on kind of teacher placement in the classroom and how many kind of times you pace back and forth and how many times you see each individual child and where you stand and whatever else. And so you have these and I work with some really talented young teachers, and it's terrifying and it makes me feel old. But it's simply saying, okay, what you need to be able to do is to be in a position where you can see what's happening, and that's it. Yes, it doesn't need all of this overcomplication. You're absolutely right, David.
See, I think it's tied into problem solving, and if you're going to solve a problem, you need common sense, right? And you're in the middle of that problem, like it's I've got to do that. So you try something, but you're not referencing some article that. Do you know what I mean? You're following a common sense thing. But last chat, David pointed out it does come down to a lot of experience, because if someone said to me in my first year of teaching, I just use your common sense, it would have been worse than what it even was, because I didn't have enough experience to, I was just surviving day by day. But I think it can be nurtured.
Are there caveats to that? Because I'm terrible for wanting to try and get things done as simply and as quickly and as easily as possible. Mm-hmm. And sometimes when I do things like that as a school leader, I miss things. So I have a great kind of vice principle. So it could be trying to, say you're making a decision about, I don't know, an event that's happening, and you think, right, okay, we're doing this, we're doing that, let's get it done, bam, 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 bam. And so, right, I want it cleared off my desk, I want it done simply, efficiently, effectively, but maybe I've not considered the admissions team have got something in their day, or the security guards off, or I've got an issue with a kid I've not considered.
But I would say that's common sense to think about those things as well.
Yeah, I think it's sometimes, but that's how. So sometimes in my head, I'm thinking, well, this is just common sense. Let's just get it done. And so maybe you're. I think sometimes I equate common sense with simple and effective, and so having common sense can make things simple and effective. But I think sometimes, and this is my failing, and this is why I've got a great kind of vice principal who's always, Barry, hang on. And she has full permission to slap me down when I do something, and she's done it before and to great effect, and we've had much better outcomes. I think it's sometimes that's where the equation moves, is you're actually doing things quickly is not necessarily always the most effective way of doing things. So I think I think maybe where common sense is not necessarily kind of simple, but rather it does require, experience, understanding, developmental
Wisdom.
understanding of the school.
So it makes a lot of sense that you'd have a 2IC that can do that.
Yeah.
If you were fully autocratic and it's like, speak to the hand, I know what I'm doing, that would not be
God,
very
no.
common sense.
No, that way madness lies. No
But
chance.
a lot of leadership is like that.
I think there's a fear culture which is stamped out of staff and a lot of kids that, oh, we shouldn't do that because it's perceived as being wrong. And I'm not talking about challenging the status quo in terms of you have rules, you have policies, you have to have that's what schools are about. But also in a classroom situation, and again, both of you hinted at it earlier. I said the olden days. I think it still happens now. I've seen, a student teacher working to, well, I'm going to have 10 minutes introduction, and then suddenly little Jemima wants to go and have a pee, and you think, oh, hang on a second, now what do I do? The common sense kicks in and said, well, there's a good discussion point that's come out. If you take an IB student, I'm leaving what I had in my head to the side. Let's focus on that and work with that, because that's going to be massively important to the bigger picture. We can pick this up next week. To have that confidence based on common sense, and the confidence, I think, is the thing that experience gives you to do that, rather than say, no, not now, please. I need to focus on this. That's where the common sense kicks in. That comes with experience, and a younger teacher may feel that they cannot do that. But other things, as I said, common sense kicks in. Just you have that. It's almost like a crisis management situation where common sense kicks in. There's a nuance there, I think. Sorry, Richard.
I think there's a distinct lack of common sense in a lot of formalized, this is how you write lesson plans instruction to early career teachers. We don't have to just throwing that out there. Because of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very rigid and it's like.
No, I know. I think this is what I think, David. This is what you were talking about. Is you need to allow people to have confidence in their environment in the classroom, and I think you kill confidence by not allowing that freedom to develop and innovate and create within that sphere. So if you're setting this up as a framework, then all you're doing is filling in the blanks. You might as well be working, on a production line. I mean, what's the point of being an educator if you're not actually helping become educated? Because what you're doing is you're simply giving them the same standard that they would have from any other teacher, and it's not about a personal relationship. A school is a collection of relationships, and if you end up over legislating everything you do in the classroom, what you do is you kill any chance of developing that, and with that you kill any chance of innovation coming from the teacher side or coming from the student side. And I think on top of that as well I suppose the biggest question is, if we're talking about kind of common sense teaching, having and being able to do that, but you have to have confidence to be able to do that. How do we then build confidence in teachers? And I think you build confidence in teachers with support. You build confidence in teachers with the frameworks in which they can operate freely as themselves. But I think that looks different in every school.
Without a fear of failing. Like in an environment where they can come to the head and say, I possibly taught the worst Year 9 lesson that's ever been taught. And the leader goes, okay, let's unpack it. Like, what? Was there anything good about it? Like, da-da-da. And then, okay, so no one died though, did they? No. Right, that's great. So let's...
No one's dead, no one's pregnant, no eviscerations.
Barry's point earlier, which I think is really good. There's an awful lot banging on at the moment on forums and LinkedIn and elsewhere about student agency. We need to give teachers that as well. Give teachers agency to have accountability, or just have it's their classrooms, their learning space. Some classrooms, their learning space, be it the sports field or whatever. How they coach, how they deliver, how they do it, given the rubric that's presented to them. They get the best out of the kids in their care, doing it the way they've discovered is the way that works for them. Some are quite formal, which is fine in terms of layout or delivery. Others are more kind of, hey, let's have a chat about this. And there's certain areas like science and sport where you've got to kind of there's risk assessment, so you have to do it in a certain way to just drive in the basics beyond common sense. It's just you've got to do this for the safety or whatever. But getting that metric all right, I think is what differentiates an outstanding school from a good school, and giving teachers agency to be able to have confidence to, to even once I'd open the doors, and a lot of people do this, once you open the doors and encourage teachers to come and sit down, I've got this idea. What do you think? Yeah, come and sit down, let's grab a coffee and have a go. I know it's not always as instant as that, but if you can do that, you get an awful lot out, because even with solid, good leadership, a lot of the teachers sit on their ideas because they're fearful of bringing them forward in a forum because they may get shouted down, rather than, yeah, why not? Let's have a go. Rather than why would you want to do that? And it's that whole tonal quality of how you address those things, I think.
And that's an example of what I'm talking about with common sense. I mean, that's how you operate, from what I can gather, Barry. And
well, yeah, I try to. I mean, it doesn't work all the time. I think and this is one of the things about social media is, the successes will find their ways up there, but the where it goes catastrophically wrong and you end up sat on your butt. It doesn't always get out there. So I'd
love you to post something that was just like.
Oh yeah, it's like today I had a terrible lesson. I mean, I always try and look for the positives. Absolutely. I mean, it's exactly what you were saying about, okay, what was the one thing that was good about that year 9 lesson? So yeah, I mean, I remember I did post about this, I think. I don't know, my brain just switched off. And I was going through this rather esoteric bit of 13th century Japanese history, and the kids were just glazing over. And one of the kids got, hang on, I think I've got this. And she started talking to someone else and say, look, I think this is how, and then someone else was listening to her. And by the end of the lesson, everyone was listening to this kid. And I was just sat there going, okay, all right, well, this is working. I mean, it's just, but I think it's
someone operating outside of common sense would have shut that down.
Yeah, maybe it's. I think I was too gone by that point. I was listening to her. I was like, "Oh, that's an interesting way of saying it." She was right. I mean, really smart kid. But I think the interesting thing is how do you then create? I suppose it comes back to culture, doesn't it? How do you create a culture where people are thinking about, okay, I've got ideas. Let's try this. Let's try something new. And so, I'll always try and find a way to say yes to things until it's like, no, we have to say no now, because that would mean I'd have to build a space laser, or it would cost huge amounts of money. But if the people kind of in my office is trying to say yes and are listening and thinking, then it means that other people do the same. And it means that people start talking to each other about things, and you create that kind of community of conversation. And I think that's really, really important. My brilliant vice principal again runs the kind of a learning communities program. So we do a process of observing each other over a period of kind of 3 or 4 weeks in little kind of teams. And then there are specific things that we're all looking at. And then we come together as a massive staff and we go, right, this is what we saw. And so we put the data in. This is what we like. This is what we thought we could do better. This is what no one mentioned at all. So really interesting bits that come out of it. And I think from there you start going, okay, that's interesting. But the best thing is where you go and see. So I go and see kind of one of our economics lead teacher, Henry. And he's using his iPad in a way that I hadn't quite considered. Now, I'm not a graph drawer, but he's then drawing these graphs and dictating to the machine. It's flying up on the board, and he's emailing this to the kids at the end while they've all got their own notes. And I'm thinking, that's brilliant. So, right, I'm having that.
Yeah.
And you start, the conversations just open up.
Can you guys... Oh, go on. I've got
no, Rich, I was going to say, and that is a classic example of common sense where you've seen a snapshot of good practice. You take it and run with it and share it. Whereas, and that's a common sense call. It's as simple as that. It's, that's really good. That'll impact on my other teachers and the kids in their care as well. I'll pass that one along. That's a good idea. Richard, sorry, mate, go.
Give us an example, you guys, one each of, or it doesn't have to be just one, but sometime in your career, let's stick to a teaching practice where you either observe something, or you're in a discussion with someone, or perhaps you were reading something and you came across an idea which was new to you in that you've never quite done it like that before, or maybe it's a tweak to something you have done, but you've gone, holy mackerel, that's great. That's brilliant. That's obviously a really good idea. That's common sense. I suspect we've all had quite a few of those, but
Should I go, Barry?
Yeah.
One that really fixes in my mind about 7 years ago. No, yeah, something like that was we were doing. I was teaching design and technology, and was health and safety. Going around machines, doing. The kids were doing in groups little risk assessments on the machines. What do you need to be? And one kid said, because it was in a school where social media it wasn't a no-go, but we were only just getting into the use of social media. So I was using Pinterest an awful lot for kind of IB project work and so on, and getting the leadership to buy into that as much as the marketing and the missions we're using at the time, Instagram and Facebook or what have you. But to use it as a tool for learning was something that they were edgy about because of the well-being and the access and everything else. Anyway, this kid sat up and said, so why don't we do TikToks on this? And I thought, hang on, okay, what do you mean? He said, well, the 20-second snapshots, we could do a health and safety, we could do a comedy one and a serious one on TikTok, and it'll be really cool. I said, oh, what a great idea, let's have a go. And I wasn't really familiar with TikTok. I knew Musically when it was, and I hadn't really followed through and all the rest of it. So we did it. And so we did a comedy one. If you use a Pidadrill, without goggles, we didn't actually do it, but it would just, mime through. And there was a bit of humor behind it, and there's a kid standing up with 4 fingers, not 5, and that type of thing. And and then we did it properly. This is how you do it, in a little 20-minute segment. And suddenly we had a complete series of health and safety instructions on TikTok, which all the kids were engaged in because they got it on their mobile devices and everything else. That was it. I can't say it's a eureka moment, but I was looking for an opportunity to use social media in a way which the team, and I was leadership, but the leadership and everyone else could see, well, this is quite cool. This is valuable. And we could do it in 2 languages. So we could do it in Swiss German, we could do it in English or whatever. And suddenly, boom. And that for me was a good example of common sense or just an idea from a child and a kid. It was really good.
Thought, well, why wouldn't you do it like that?
Using the tool to give agency to the thing you were trying to do. And suddenly, and also, it was the candy store moment because all the kids were then talking about it throughout the school, saying, oh, in design, they're using TikTok. And I hadn't thought of that aspect. And then suddenly he said, well, why are you using TikTok, which is the other side of it? So then I explained and showed, and I said, well, that's really cool. And the parents liked it. But there's an element of risk, but the common sense was, well, what a great way to get this out on an important issue via something I hadn't considered. So that's one of my things I could remember.
So then my next question is there any, if you're observing that unfold, like you put any professional in the room who's not saying anything, not interfering with what's going on, but is observing everything, is there any possibility that any professional would go, oh, that should not happen?
No, absolutely. The 2 main things which came up was you using mobile devices in the classroom environment. So mobile phones were the main ways of shooting the little TikToks. That's the first one. And the second one, which I do understand, was the control of what was going out about the brand, the school. Are you going to damage the reputation as a consequence of doing that? Which I also, because that was actually under my remit then. So I got that as well. So your accounts and things on social media, as they are anywhere, are tightly controlled by an editorial team.
Sure.
But the thing about TikTok at the time, which is different, and I think it's like X used to be, schools now go through, oh yes, we want to be on the cusp, we want to be innovative, we want to be about the now. You do something really cool in the classroom, it doesn't go online until 2 weeks later because it goes through all these protocols and editorials and, oh, we're not sure if the kid's got the right tie on or the right school thing. And you completely miss the point of what you captured in the moment back then. That's a common sense for me. I mean, if a kid's standing there with, forgive me, 2 fingers up at the screen or, without a shirt on, that's a common sense call. No, that is totally unacceptable. That ain't going out.
So, Barry, you got an example of a teaching?
Not one as good as that. I think the TikTok thing is really interesting because I think the editorial control is always, I think is sometimes is necessary, but sometimes is an exercise in stupidity. There's no need for it because the reality is that the kids will make TikToks. Outside my office window, in fact, is a perfect spot for kids to make TikToks. So I know that there's reams of social media content coming out of my college every single day that I have no control over. And so to have this kind of specific control over maybe one or two things, I think sometimes people can over-egg it. I think my kind of, I don't know if it's a eureka moment, but I was teaching, it was the first year of teaching. And of course, I'd come from a very traditional background. I went to a grammar school, it was chalk and talk, it was, shut up, sit down, listen, and then, polite discussion. And then it was a zoo at lunchtime. So but gamification of teaching, I think, is a really interesting thing. And I got turned onto it in my very first year. And it was my head of department had found this game for the outbreak of World War II. And it was
what form was the
something
game?
called it's all on paper. So you had data sheets and different teams. It was a year 9 game. So the kids would each play a different country, and it would be they'd all have different things that they were trying to do. So you'd have France, you'd have America, you'd have Britain, you'd have Germany. So it was very, very British. So Germany's aim and ambition was to start the war. So it was very, very non-PC. But the kids really got into it. And so from that point, I think the idea of gamifying something to gain traction with a subject or with an idea, I think has always stuck with me. So it's why, I went down kind of last year, I went down a Lego route with my guys while I was kind of doing medieval architecture.
Right.
I was like, Notre Dame came out. There's the Lego model of Notre Dame. I was like, right, we are building this. And so we started doing kind of flying buttresses and kind of wall construction. We've got the documentaries out. It's like, this is why this is important. The buttresses and the flying buttress especially is one of these amazing things that, creates these grand edifices in the 12th century. But from the game, this was back in 2001 when I started. I then thought, well, okay, let's try stuff. And so I started coming up with my own games. And there was, oh God, what was it? It was the Battle of Britain. So this is a British boarding school. So of course, all of these things, you have to do. It's so it's very kind of little jingoistic at times. And I just, you make up this game about, and I became fascinated with the turning circle of the Hawker Hurricane. Because the Hawker Hurricane had a smaller turning circle than the Messerschmitt 109s, and so it meant even though the Spitfire was like this big thing, the Hawkers actually ended up doing quite a deal of damage because they could outturn these kind of faster planes. And so you have these different kind of ways of doing it, and we had squares, so this checkerboard kind of in the corridors of the history department. So we thought, let's give it a go. And I mean, the kids kind of got into it. It was ill executed at the time, but kind of just refined it, and much to the amusement of my colleagues. But this is the thing: I was a 20-something, early 20s teacher, and I was working with a group of guys who all had various degrees of experience, and they were like, "Yeah, cool, let's see if this works." And I think that level of support and understanding of he's trying to innovate, let's see if we can support him, I think that was a formative point in my career right there.
I'll share two things. One really quick. I was in a school and I was struggling with some kids I just wasn't getting on well with, and we brought in a consultant who ran an after school session, talked about management strategies, whatever. And there was this one thing that really hit me, and it was like the minute after class. It's that simple, but I could see, like, rather than try to fix everything in the classroom, just have a minute after class. It's a fireside chat, right? I'm not up here and he's down there. It's a boys' school.
Yeah,
we're equals. We're having a fireside chat. It's just a minute after class, nice and calm. What's going on? And I would often say, I'm out of ideas. I feel like I'm on your case all the time. I'm out of ideas. You've got to help me here. What should I do? Even though I had ideas, but and I'm one instance where I heard something and it just went, oh, that's so obvious, so obviously better than what I've been doing. And I adopted that for the rest of my career. I made a thing out of it. The thing that I put in the article, I was playing around with those ideas and I knew that I was following some good practice. There was a friend of mine who I used to have educational chats with, and he just referenced the creating a need to learn. And it was like, yeah, well, what we need to do, if you've got to teach them something, you've got to create a need in them to learn what it is you want to teach them. And there's a whole lot of ways of doing that. And it was like, holy mackerel, that's what I'm trying to do, but I didn't see it in that light. So that's where asking questions comes from. That's where, oh, so I shouldn't just stop the class all the time and say, right, everyone, this is the next thing you need to know. Let them run into issues so they put their hand up. Now, that doesn't sound like a big deal, but it's a paradigm shift. So now kids at different stages are asking for that information that I want to tell them. But guess what? It only takes half as long to tell it because they want to hear it. And then you do it 4 or 5 times, but you're instructing 4 or 5 times anyway when you do the whole lesson, because most of the kids aren't ready for it, and most of them are turned off. So you've got to repeat yourself anyway. So you might as well do it in a good way. So it's like just-in-time teaching. But this whole creating a need to learn, it's just so obvious. But I'd never thought about it like that before. So to me, that's just common sense now. Like, why wouldn't you create a need in someone to learn something, rather than sit them down in a chair and say, let me tell you what you need to learn, kid. So it's little things like that have always inspired me. And I can't for the life of me, there were some things I think are universal, but then I like to overgeneralize, like, fostering agency in students. Like, I can't find any reason why that's not just an absolute no-brainer, but it doesn't happen much. The difference between teaching a bunch of kids who've got agency and trying to extract teeth from a bunch of kids who don't have agency is, it's like you might as well be on different planets. But
what do you think is the main reason for that, Richard? I mean, I've got an answer, but what do you think the main reason is why there's that doesn't occur as much as we would perhaps like, be it teachers or kids?
Because for 200 years, we've been teaching a certain way, most of us, and no one's ever asked about, well, we haven't talked about what passive learning looks like and what active learning looks like, and no one's been asked, well, what's your default approach, and does your default, like, what do you do 80% of the time, 90% of the time in the classroom? When you get to serious teaching, what do you do? Oh, I do this and this and this. Okay, and does that produce active or passive learning? Now, if someone asked me in my first couple of years of teaching, I'd go 100% passive, because I didn't know anything else. But the discussions never happened. So one is a lack of awareness, but then secondly, now people are talking about agency, but I think there's too much intellectualization and not enough practical ideas about what you can actually do. And it's not anywhere near as hard as you think. And then let's talk about the mathematics a lot, right? So in maths, particularly when it gets up into DP and stuff, oh, well, we can't do that because, we've got so much in the curriculum. Well, hang on. If we're going to bring common sense to this, surely the most inefficient way for kids to learn mathematics is to trudge on through doing stuff that they don't understand. So if a kid understands what's underneath this algorithm and it makes sense to them, the learning trajectory is way faster than if they're just grinding with the information that's coming in and practicing but no one seems to think about that because no one's pushed them. So I think it's partly a lack of awareness, and a lack of ideas. Like, people haven't really shown them the options, and they're just holding on to the past. Just not. Well, some people just don't like change. I think
schools in general do get hung up on heritage a lot, Richard, and that's right. And it's heritage of the way they do things, be it just organizational, curriculum, the way the day runs, through to how subjects are still delivered and syllabuses are drafted at a kind of group thought base back at whatever curriculum provider is doing the work. There is a heritage thing of that, and but you need people to push the envelope. The kind of, I don't want to the Richard Branches of this world to say, well, yeah, why not? Let's have a go. Yeah. Knowing that there is a risk, and knowing that if it doesn't go to plan, do we have a robust kind of safety net, for want of a better term, in place, which will catch that residue, but then use it to kind of go again, to review and evaluate. The problem that you have in schools, and this is a big problem, I think, is we have an element of a time constraint, because as the way it works at the moment, reverse engineering it, if we're looking, universities there, they need to get this much knowledge to sit that assessment, to get those grades, to get to that point. And it is as fundamental as that, even though there's a lot of talk about change. And I think it's right that there should be, not about universities and attaining that, but how we get there in the metrics of identifying clever, able kids or whatever. You get an able musician who can't write music, but when you get like an Ed Sheeran who can play a guitar quite well and do his thing, but didn't have necessarily the ability to write music, is that a handicap to getting up to the next stage? But languages with me, I didn't do French at school. I married a French girl. My home's been in France 25 years. I can communicate and talk in French reasonably well, but masculine, feminine, is that table a guy? Is that chair a girl? But I can communicate.
Yeah.
And those are the things where the common sense starts to come into play and how we steer. And I think there's always someone's got to be the first to go forward on it. Without fear of repercussion. I think that's the thing where common sense and that fear of repercussion comes into play.
Back to your first question, like why is there resistance to adopting agency in kids, actively trying to foster it? I think there's some massive misconceptions, and one of the big ones, especially in the real subjects like mathematics and science and stuff.
That's it. End of podcast. That's it. Goodbye.
Didn't you know that I was being facetious there, tongue in cheek? To do those sorts of things, like to teach in a way that fosters agency, takes more time. There's a massive misconception, and it doesn't have to. Yeah, you can do things that take more time, but there are things that will save you time if you allow the kids some responsibility and some agency. And so that's my...
You're right. Common sense stuff is quick. It is let's do it. It's not a completely planned out thing. I think that's the point.
It's not necessarily quick, but it's not over intellectualized. I think it's linked to intuition, and this is why, because is intuition kind of universal? Now I know people commented in that article, it's a cultural thing. There are some cultures that just don't do common sense at all, right? But it doesn't mean that you shouldn't give it a shot. I guess it's also linked to teacher agency. Sure, a new teacher out, you might not be asking them just to follow your intuition, but isn't allowing teacher agency also saying, look, do some research, chat amongst yourselves, but you've got to implement something new, like and go for it and support each other, and that's what I'm doing in schools now is formalizing a structure for that. But so if you're doing that with teachers, they've got more freedom to follow what's working, reflect on what is and what isn't working, collaborate with each other, observe each other, and everyone grows. You can't not grow. No one's going to die. That, to me, links with the common sense thing, because you go, oh, wow. Because they're not going to implement an idea that they think's a bad idea. If it doesn't resonate, an experienced teacher's not going to do it. I wouldn't.
Is it? I think what you're talking about is it's student agency is vital, and it's absolutely right. You can do these things very, very kind of quickly. I mean, what you were talking about earlier was about student agency. I think it's about the removal of fear. It's about kind of ensuring there's supportive structures, and I think once you have that in, then you can start to move things in the right way. But I think as well, you're also talking about building a culture of common sense approaches where everyone buys into it and everyone has to be on the same team. And if you've got, a few, they're not even bad apples, it's just people who want to do things their way. And exactly what kind of, David, what you were saying about, kind of tradition and things like that, they can't kind of let go of how they were taught. So, because we've all been to school, and our formative ideas about education are mine are based on, the early 80s. It's not, so it's very much, it's kind of tradition, chalk and talk, having, board rubbers buzzed at my head by an irate French mistress, that was education. So I think it's that the change of that in that culture, the change will take some time, and you need to give people the confidence to move it, but also remove the fear they have if they try something that doesn't work. And I think that's the really tough bit, to try and inculcate a common sense, practical approach to the problem solving in the classroom, because people want to turn back to what they think is the book. You go back to your, whatever your book is, your Bible, your Quran, your central way of approaching your profession. And for many people, that's their degree and their qualification, especially in the first kind of 5 or 10 years of their career. And it's only later you then turn to the first 5 or 10 years of your career as the touchstone for what you can now do. And then instead of using it as a touchstone, you then turn it into a foundation, and then you can start to build, I think. But that's me being always.
Well, I think the ideal foundation is one of growth, like where foundation is, look at I'm not saying don't look at the research, but also look for things that make sense. Look for things in your own classroom that are not working. What isn't working? What is working? Like, get other people in to observe. What do you think I could do better? What did you like? Because ask them what they do like, because you always miss, when you're teaching, you miss the good things, right? And to have people say, well, I really like this and I like that. And I thought, oh, really? I didn't even realize that was a good thing. Because you're always looking at what's not working, but you should look at both. And I think that ought to be the foundation, not look at me, am I a great teacher, and look at my results. It's like I'm always open to new ideas. And if you've got a school community.
There's an overlap here, I think, on something which I looked into a while ago. I did a talk on this about innovation in schools as well. And there's that with innovation, there's always a bit of fear or anxiety. The common sense things quite often is the guiding light for innovation in many ways. Sometimes it's technology driven, sometimes it's but it goes through. And the analogy I'll give very quickly is when Dyson did those air blade dryers for your hands. They tried to trial them in a couple of hotels down near Bath and things. Exactly. And the hotels didn't like the idea, because even though sustainability to replace paper towels and everything, they didn't want to be seen as the hotel with these fangled air dryer things, which overrode the quality of accommodation, the restaurant, the Michelin star, whatever it was. So it would detract from what the meat of what they, in their minds, they were about. The common sense was go with the Dyson.
Yep.
Schools inherently, I think, also suffer this from an innovation standpoint, and that's a common sense. If we do this, and it's a common sense school, how do we manage the parental expectation or the school sponsor or anything, so they don't see us as just being a kind of, we're playing around with something which is seen as innovative, but people will frown at, because surely the core element of what we do is academic prowess and et cetera, et cetera. So how do you balance that? And the common sense innovation, I think, does quite often go hand in hand, but managing expectations, so you're not seen as innovative. Schools are great, but quite often in the mindset of people, as you said, everyone's been to school. Parents are the worst nightmare. Sorry for parents out there, I'm one of them, because they always think they know better, because it's the only job in the world where every single one of the people you work with has actually been in that profession, i.e. as a student. The majority. So they always have an idea, well, when I was at school, all that stuff that comes out, and you think, here we go. And if you think it's bad, do it in design. I made one of those when I was a kid. Yeah, okay, we'll come back to that. But in terms of innovation, parents think, oh, is that a risk? Is my Johnny going to suffer as a consequence of school being innovative because they've gone paperless, or they're using TikToks or whatever it might be? No, but it's managing all of that. That's the big thing, I think, Rich. And that's it's funny how common sense can suddenly create quite a few other thought processes that you have to bring to the game so that you can take common sense forward.
We need to wrap this up. I'm going to put Barry on the hot seat. Can you give one little summary of what this chat is suggesting, or what you would suggest in terms of common sense? It's not, like, is this just airy-fairy, just three guys having a bit of fun, or is there a place in schools for common sense, or in the classroom? Like, what?
No, I think there absolutely is. I think common sense teaching for me ties into intuitive teaching, which ties into a culture of respect and understanding and support of the youngest teachers, but also the most seasoned teachers. But on the other side, it's also one that's supported by the youngest teachers, who are closer to kind of new thinking and new ideas, and it's supported by the oldest teachers, who have got all of this experiential wisdom, much like my old deputy Nigel. And so within that, I think it's about finding your purpose and your approach and your groove in the classroom, and being able to trust yourself in those moments to lead with intuition, common sense, and the experience that you've gleaned from those on either side, at either end of that kind of career kind of trajectory, and taking it forward in hopefully a community that's built on relationships and built on kindness and built on respect.
Brilliant. David, 1 minute summary.
Yeah, I think 1 minute summary. I think I agree with Barry. Giving teachers the agency to find their mojo and what they do, because they're driven by what they learned themselves at tertiary education and teacher training and blah, 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 whatever it might be. So giving them the space to explore and find their mojo. But I think at the end of the day, common sense should be applied at any time when we get, we're there to give the best to the students and the staff in our care, as leaders, but as schools, as a community. So does this common sense call benefit the children? Are they going to be better youngsters for it? In whatever metric you're applying, whether it's a subject-based thing or it's just a, well-being, health, outside play, whatever it might be, does it improve the quality of what they're doing? And does this common sense call improve the quality of our teachers delivering what they want to do and how they do it and the way they do it and having the confidence to do it? I think both students and teachers need confidence to not challenge the status quo, but just be able to. We just to work with them and give them the best possible platform so they can explore, discover, be innovative, and crack on.
Brilliant. I'll give it a crack by just saying that I think we should approach our classrooms as problem-solving exercises. And when something's not working, just bring common sense to it. Like, what's the obvious thing to do? Like, something needs to change here. Make a change, try something, and also have a look at what other people are doing. Let the, oh, wow, experiences happen, welcome them, and act on them. Just still look at your research, but I just think a common sense approach has got its place. So, gentlemen, I think we'll wrap it up. I'll do the formal goodbye, but stay on the line. So thanks, everyone. Thanks for the chat, and let's see what sort of response we get.
All right, Richard, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. Really enjoyed it.
Cool.
Thanks, guys. Good start to a Tuesday.